right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in on our first ever The Road to Cyber webinar series. My name is David Evenden. I am your host who is going to guide you through this series just so we can be upfront and forward about everything that we're doing. I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. This is my second ever recording of any type of webinar, and the first one was about 2 hours ago. So very fresh at this and very new. So if I fail epically, just know I expect that, and we'll go from there. So I'm a type of offensive security analyst, formerly a computer hacker for the NSA, and even that term I'll use lightly. Diligent script kiddie, as Tinker likes to say, and you know, I excel mostly in coming up with ideas and moving people forward and trying out new things. I think that's the curiosity of trying new things is really just hacking. And so, but today on our first ever Road to Cyber, we're actually going to talk about something that my team and I have started to question and sort of push into a new direction, and that's what the virtual CISO is. We're going to talk about a bunch of different options and a bunch of different things that make up what sort of a scaled stack managed security service provider actually is, an MSSP, if you will, and kind of what all the different offerings on there are that make that up. So you know, a virtual CISO, for instance, an organization might fit into a different industry or compliance sector, and or an industry or a sector that falls under some form of compliance, and it's regulated, and they need a information or chief information security officer in order to help them with that. Lots of times there may not be a need for a full-time CISO, so different organizations like our states and geographical locations provide the opportunity for an organization to hire a virtual CISO. If you only need 10 hours a month in order to fulfill those specific types of requirements, then you can do that. And so that's traditionally compliance and policy. That's traditionally what a virtual CISO is. There's all kinds of regulations and authorities out there defining what that is. I can define it for you, but you can also go out on the internet and find 20 different versions of the same definition. So feel, you know, happy hunting. But on that same side, my team and I are coming up with different solutions to offer stacked security services to organizations who may need that, may fall under specific types of regulatory compliance, and really either don't have a need or can't afford or can't provide the type of solutions necessary in order to hire all the security staff themselves. So, for instance, that might be pen testing, vulnerability assessments, vulnerability scans, BDR, which is backup disaster recovery, DLP, which is data loss prevention, and antivirus, and installed antivirus in the solution, and the capabilities of remotely managing that. Additionally, on top of all of that, the compliance and support of policies, and ensuring that those policies are not only written properly, approved and implemented throughout an enterprise environment. So a lot of the Road to Cyber series webinar subjects are going to be based directly, or on an article that either I've written myself or someone else on our staff has written, and that person might actually host the webinar series. But for the first 4, in the next 4 weeks, you're stuck with me. So thanks a lot again for joining. Let's go ahead and dive into to advanced virtual CISO for remote teams. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and share this window so I can show you guys what the article is, and kind of walk through there and take a look at it. So initially, here up on Pentest Mag, you can read what is a general virtual CISO. We've kind of already gone over a little bit of that, kind of stepping into the different FINRA, SEC, different governing authorities that might make up the requirements for what a virtual CISO is. As we sort of move down in here, you can kind of see a CISO's typical responsibilities are providing vision and scope and direction for an organization, convey cybersecurity goals, determining improper security frameworks, understanding industry trends, and leading a specific team for architectural security, um, budgeting, providing guidance and support for achieving compliance requirements, managing information security teams themselves, as well as implementing specific types of security protocols like pen testing, vulnerability assessments, and stuff like that, which we'll define here just a little bit. Because one of my main goals throughout the course of this is to actually be able to define what some of these more higher end terminology might be, but in a way where it makes sense to you. I'm reading this, I'm looking at this, I literally have no idea what you're talking about. So let's try to provide some of that back to you guys. So again, let's just talk about like a CISO really quickly, and what some of that capacity might look like. So let's just say, for instance, I have an organization. That organization has email configuration, computer configuration, inbound connectivity, a VPN, for instance, which is virtual private network, and so on and so forth. Let's just say, for instance, all of that, the email exchange server, whether or not it be cloud or whether or not it be on-prem being in your enterprise environment, and on the cloud being hosted by Gmail or Office 365 or something, and it never touches your local enterprise environment, which might be, I go into an office space and I log into a physical computer sitting there, but my email it doesn't sit in that space anywhere. It sits on Microsoft's platform or Google's platform or something of nature. So let's just say, for instance, that you do have an Exchange server sitting in your environment and you have all of your machines sitting in there and no one on staff is managing or configuring that, but it's being done by someone. What that basically means is that your organization has hired an MSP or managed service provider in order to host to configure all of that infrastructure for you. As that happens and takes place, a lot of MSPs quite often may not implement security. I'm not going to say that sort of in a blanketed term, because there are a lot of MSPs that are doing that and doing it well, whether or not they're doing it themselves or they're outsourcing that as a white label service to another security firm. Either way, if it's being provided, that's phenomenal. So if that is being provided, then solutions like the Advanced Virtual CISO may not be required necessary for an organization like yours. You just need to fall back under the scope of what's actually being performed within your environment, so you know quite well what's actually happening. So kind of step into that process, understanding, on step one, what does your asset management and security awareness actually look like? What do you have in your environment? What's there? What stood up? What's configured? If you don't have a proper asset management or a stable understanding of what you have in your environment, then that's probably step one. So moving down through here, let's just really quickly, as we sort of start to talk about like AVs and BDRs and DLPs and the entire environment, we'll kind of go through and this is basically what I would sort of define in my own conversation of sort of the whole scale approach to let's just say enterprise-based security, understanding asset management, and moving out from that perspective to how am I offering different types of security within that space, whether or not it be a firewall, perimeter controls, implementing a specific type of antivirus, what partners am I using? I might have a SIM. A SIM is an aggregated logging platform for either alerts or logs throughout your environment. And then different types of IOCs, for instance, an IOC being an indicator of compromise. Is there some type of signature or activity within an environment that shows me that there might be something malicious going on? And then sort of on the outer perimeter more has to do with the people and their visibility. Do I have proper teamwork implemented within my environment? Do I have the right leadership in place? Do all of my teamwork and my leadership have the right experience? And then do all of those people have the right visibility? Visibility is key for any type of security throughout an organization. Excuse me. Of course, I'm going to cough. Oh, man. So here at Standard User, we kind of approach security in a three-part process. That might be, for us, that's test, solve, teach. We might come into an environment, perform a penetration test. A penetration test or a vulnerability assessment Those are not the same thing. I'm not using them interchangeably. I'm just using them as stacked. You might have one service or another. Um, if you come in and have one of those types of things perform, a vulnerability assessment might be assessing the probability of impact for malicious activity against your environment. And a penetration test would be a, um, a series of computer hackers that kind of come in and perform exploits and gain interactive access to your environment so they can show you physically, not necessarily what probability is, but in reality, what can people gain access to. Um, and so here, as we perform, the test, solve, teach process, the test is actually performing those actions. The solving is helping and working with the organization or enterprise staff mitigate some of those, identifying the solutions in order to close some of those visibility gaps, and then teach them. How do I go through that process of actually, like, how can you do this yourself? Why is this a visibility gap? And just processes like that. So, of course, my phone is going to start ringing. So as we kind of move out from there, if we sort of look at this box here, some of those first steps are reconnaissance, target, breach, persistence, migration, and exfiltration. Those are the steps that I like to outline as what a penetration test is made up of. And so what that means is I go through there, what risk determination is. I'm sorry. So reconnaissance being what can I externally see about your organization. As I move into the next step, what is my specific types of targets? Can I identify any external infrastructure or personnel that I can target? Then throwing specific types of exploits, can I gain interactive access? That might be what your breach section is. And then once I gain that interactive access, I obviously don't want to have to throw an exploit every single time. You might be asking yourself, what is an exploit? An exploit is a type of, let's just say, tool that can be used that can take advantage of a vulnerability in a target infrastructure or an application or enterprise environment. Just even what is an exploit is an entire series in and of itself. So anyways, you might throw an exploit with a specific tool and then gain access to an environment. Obviously, you don't want to have to throw that exploit every time because one, it may not be available, two, it might get patched, three, it may not work in the future. You may crash it too many times, or you may not be able to find it, or they may block your ability to do that. So you want to install something called persistence. You want to be able to install that in an environment where you can actually gain access to that environment without throwing an exploit whenever you want to, that type of availability. So after you have that persistence, if you want to move it around in an environment, you can move from one computer to another, and there's tons of different ways you can do this. But that's migration or spreading your access throughout an enterprise environment. This is sort of the steps that a malicious person would take, or a person with authority to be in that environment. A pen tester is something they might do. Doesn't necessarily have to be something malicious. In this scenario, this is somebody with authority identifying vulnerabilities and helping you close them. So then exfiltration, this might be data exfiltration of confidential or critical data. So as you identify that confidential critical data, being able to actually get it out of the environment to use it on something else, I've gained access to bank information, I've gained access to what my next bids for different contracts are, and I can bid lower on somebody else, so on and so forth. What that business continuity impact might look like, that's the information that you want to try to obtain. Based on what your authoritative requirements are within doing a penetration test, you may have the permission to do that, and you may not have the permission to do that. You may just have to show the probability of impact and not steal that data in and of itself. You just need to make sure that you're within the scope. And so after we move through that way of recon to exfiltration, then we want to move in the opposite direction and identifying what that critical data is. So this is how you solve those problems. What is your critical data? Who has access? Who can see it within a network environment? Who can see that? Do I have proper network visibility? Do I have the proper capability in order to see movement from different machines to that critical data in my environment? From within that movement and environment, let's just say somebody gains access to an initial computer. Do I have visibility on those initial computers? Can I see what's actually happening? And so on and so forth. So moving back and forth from there, breach, initial breach or initial access, that's perimeter visibility. Can I see different types of attacks coming in, whether or not that be through a specific attack against something hosted on the internet, or is that a phishing campaign for an email inbound? OSINT visibility. OSINT visibility, again, the entire realm of OSINT, which is open source intelligence, how I use that terminology. Other people might use that differently, might call it something different. Um, what is out there about your organization that can be used against you? And that entire, taking all of those steps combined, associated with your with the vulnerability identification and analysis, combined with all of those support and mitigation steps in order to solve those, you can actually make a full-fledged risk determination about what needs to happen and where you need to start. Going through that process and teaching people how to perform those steps on their own is then you have the full three-step process of test, solve, teach. So moving down from there, kind of the following items that make up what we consider to be an advanced virtual CISO, being of course that compliance and oversight, review and support from a virtual CISO. Pardon me. And then implementing a specific security solution that might offer antivirus, DLP, and BDR capabilities. So an antivirus, I think most people are fairly familiar with what an antivirus is. Antivirus is something you install on a local computer that helps you identify malicious and anomalous activity, whether or not it be based on known signatures of bad activity, or just anomalous based on this is my baseline and I'm seeing something activity that does not meet my normal baseline. DLP, data loss prevention. Is there any type of way where I can identify the exfiltration of specific types of data? Or is there stuff being copied off of the machine or so on and so forth? BDR, backup disaster recovery. Is there regular consistent backups being happening on my machine? That way in the event, say for instance, ransomware gets installed on the machine, I can just immediately back up all of my files. And while the risk of ransomware spreading from machine to machine might still be high, at least I can back up my local machine or reimage that machine and reinstall all of those files on it. And then monthly vulnerability scans. Monthly vulnerability scans are one of those implementations that I like to consider being one of the security best practices of an environment, so you can actually see changes that might be made throughout an environment. The vulnerability scan could actually also provide a good asset awareness or asset management lifecycle policies. And then quarterly vulnerability assessments, that might be where you're actually having somebody come in or you're doing that yourself. Perform vulnerability assessments so you can actually have a better understanding of what your threat landscape in your environment looks like. As you kind of understand that, you can sort of have a pretty good understanding of whenever you have your annual scheduled penetration test performed, you have a pretty good understanding and can predict kind of what it's going to say. If you might be thinking to yourself, okay, well, if I know what it's going to say, why am I going to get it done? Well, what happens if there's things that's on there that you don't know what's going to say? What happens if there's a visibility gap in your environment and you just don't know what's there? Just because you think you know what the answer is going to be doesn't mean that it's actually right. Everybody needs some type of support and compliance processes and steps, because our visibility of our environment is only as good as how well it's tested. So I just call these monthly security roundups as one of the last portions of that. But monthly security roundup, in my opinion, is basically just having a monthly security meeting with the engineering or security or pardon me, or team of an environment in order to provide visibility. Excuse me, pardon me. In order to provide sort of awareness of what all of the annual and quarterly and monthly assessments are actually happening. If you're seeing normal type of triggers, or somebody's backup disaster recovery solution is not actually working, having a monthly security roundup in order to address those issues is incredibly important. So kind of moving through here, you can see some of the suggested requirements of what an installed agent and the solutions that should be on there, sector-based compliance reviews, what DHS identifies as critical infrastructure. Again, this list is organized in a way that's not a representative of a categorical hierarchy. So they're not in any specific order. They're just up there. And then moving down, compliant heavy sectors. So you might have like GSA, FINRA, SEC, and Department of Energy, for instance. And then kind of, you know, we actually have all up here, all links to CISA-Gov's DHS. Let's see, these are the publications outlining what their sector or industry plans are. And then sort of moving down into here, monthly vulnerability scans, kind of what that looks like, how to perform those scans, what different tool sets you might be able to use in order to do that. For a vulnerability scan in itself, just sort of pushing something out, you can use Nmap with an NSE vulnerability switch. You can use a Nessus scanner. There's all kinds of other stuff. There's tons and tons of tool sets out there that allow you to do that. Vulnerability assessments. Vulnerability assessments is the process of maybe running different types of tool sets, actually processing through and doing some manual checking of different applications, that entire process, and then performing an entire assessment of the vulnerability landscape in an environment. And then a penetration test would be the active attempt to gain interactive access of a target organization. Now, all of these definitions that I'm using, they're just very overly simplified. There's a lot more that goes into each of those different sections of, you know, what a penetration test is, vulnerability assessment, and vulnerability scan. But we're sort of trying to keep them at very high levels so you understand the differences between them. So again, moving down here, kind of since I'm talking about penetration tests, kind of going over that again in here. But monthly security roundups, again, kind of showing what the probability versus impact is of a security solution. And then moving down, after all of that is performed, where we might sit within, pardon me, where you might sit within the cybersecurity maturity model and what that looks like and so on and so forth. Okay, so so we've kind of gone through all of those different sections of that. Just wanted to provide an oversight and general awareness of what that is, keep it fairly short, and provide an opportunity for people to learn. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope that everyone has a great week, and we will talk to you again next Thursday.